Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Martin, and this presentation is titled FERPA Updates and Relevance to You. FERPA and its relevance to you. So FERPA is known as the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. It applies to any school receiving federal funding. And this includes the protection of personally identifiable information and educational records. So once a student enters into school, preschool or kindergarten, we begin collecting information, and that all goes into the student's educational record. Personally identifiable information includes information such as the student name, address, family information, social security number, identifiable personal characteristics, or other indirect identifiers such as the student's date of birth. Schools are responsible for student data and keeping this data secure. Parents own FERPA rights until a child turns 18, so they're able to access that data at any time, make requests for the modification of that data if they feel that it is inaccurate. Also, and this is until the child turns 18. Once that child turns 18, denying that child access to his rights or her rights would be a FERPA violation. Also important information is that medical records become educational records once that medical information is placed into the student's school file. FERPA and its relevance. Follow school guidelines by encrypting files and old emails, shredding old paper files, and also use caution when sharing or viewing files of students other than your own. This is information that is not considered educational records. So these are just teacher or administrator notes that are just basically like if the teacher were going to be requesting a substitute or something, it would be some of those informal notes that would just aid that substitute teacher. Those are not considered educational records. Notes that are obtained by the school resource officer. Medical or psychological records of an 18-year-old student. So once a student becomes or turns 18, the medical and psychological records that were within the educational file are now no longer considered part of the educational file because those records are still relevant. Personnel records of employees are not considered educational records, and then also directory information. And this is just basic identifying data to which parents can opt out of the sharing of that data. FERPA does permit internal sharing of information on a need-to-know basis. So what that's referring to is like one of your students is going to a new teacher, a new grade level, so it would be meeting with that teacher to kind of discuss the student's strengths and weaknesses in order to more adequately instruct the student. That is considered a need-to-know basis, so FERPA does permit that internal sharing of information. FERPA also permits sharing if legitimate educational interest exists. So this would be such as a student transferring to a new school. The sending school would be able to communicate with the receiving school to share that information. Also, state educational agencies are permitted to access students' personal records if the educational interest exists and is legitimate. FERPA update basics. So due to advancements in technology, FERPA updates have been implemented. Since 2013, 40 states have passed approximately 120 new student privacy laws. So exceptions to FERPA and data sharing with online vendors have resulted in student data leaks. So with the advancements in technology, schools have collaborated with online vendors, and it has resulted in a lot of student data leaks. So it is the schools need to be aware that it is their responsibility to ensure that vendors are FERPA compliant, because it is the schools that are responsible for that data that is collected on their students. FERPA deficits. So individuals cannot sue the school for FERPA violations. So they can file a complaint, which we'll delve into later on in this presentation. But they can file a complaint, but they cannot sue the school for a FERPA violation. Parents of students or students 18 years of age must opt out of activities that would potentially disclose their personal information. So it is the responsibility of that particular student or that student's parents to opt out of those activities that could potentially result in the disclosing of information. Also, FERPA does not provide guidance on the safeguarding of its student information. So there's no guidance offered to the schools from FERPA that says how that data should be safeguarded. Data destruction. Fair information practice principles, it just pretty much states that destroy the data when it is no longer relevant. So when it's no longer needed, such as when the student graduates, just destroy that educational record. Types of destruction. There is clearing, which is just a program that would wipe the system of the data. There's purging, which is a technique that would just purge all of this information into one source, rendering retrieval of the data to be very difficult. And then there's also destroying, which is a lab technique that provides the most security of proper destruction. School surveillance and FERPA. So due to the Fourth Amendment, schools must notify school community of cameras. So there must be notification if cameras are going to be in use, because those recordings could contain personally identifiable information. So Electronic Communication Privacy Act of 1986 stated that video surveillance is acceptable if there is little to no expectation of privacy. So areas of the school such as hallways, main offices, where you don't expect any privacy anyway, it's okay to provide video surveillance. Audio recording is prohibited unless one party consents. Some states require two-party consent in order for audio recording. So basically the research suggests that if you do want audio recording, you should consult with a legal counsel in order just to ensure that you're within FERPA guidelines. FERPA guidance. Images are considered educational records if they are directly related to the particular student and obtained by the school. So what is considered to be directly related to the student is a recording that is used for disciplinary purposes. So if a misbehavior was caught on camera and they wanted to obtain the evidence from that camera, that would be directly related to the particular student, and they would need consent for that. Content which contains personally identifiable information, or if the effort of obtaining the surveillance is to make the specific student the focus, then it would be considered directly related to a particular student. So not directly related to a student is when a student is arbitrarily displayed, such as walking through the hallway, or if the activity under surveillance is open to the public. So if there were an assembly to which members of the public were invited, and a student was on videotape, that would not be considered directly related to the student. It would just be arbitrarily displayed. Recommendations for surveillance. So this is guidance for schools for camera use. Install cameras in areas with little to no expectation of privacy. So that again would be the hallways or main offices. Provide notification to the school community. So just make them aware that you are on camera. Consult with legal counseling if enabling audio. And then also establish protocols for the equipment maintenance and recordings, and then release of those recordings, just so there's a standard practice for how to handle those recordings, because they do contain some sensitive information, such as personally identifiable information. Law enforcement and video surveillance. So written consent is required for law enforcement to access video surveillance if that surveillance is obtained by the school. Exceptions to this is when video surveillance was obtained by the school resource officer, when information in that surveillance is needed in order to ensure the health and safety of other students, or if that surveillance was requested from the courts. So law enforcement are considered school officials when they're performing a service to ensure school safety, and when they are doing so, such as a school resource officer, they are also subject to the FERPA guidelines, and they must follow those and be compliant with those guidelines. FERPA and ICE, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So school resource officers are not required to report undocumented students. Schools are considered sensitive locations, which prevent ICE. So ICE is not allowed to just go into sensitive locations unless they feel, or unless it is deemed that the public safety is at risk. ICE must provide a subpoena if requesting information. So if they are entering into the school, then they must provide a subpoena before they can request any information. Plyler versus Doe was a ruling that stated that states cannot deny public education access on the basis of citizenship status. So just because a student is or is not a citizen, they are still provided with equal educational opportunities through public education. Schools cannot require a social security number or a birth certificate for enrollment. They may ask about the student's current residence, but they cannot require the social security number or birth certificate for enrollment purposes. Online vendors. Schools are responsible for vendors' use of student data. So therefore, it's very important to screen these vendors to ensure that they are FERPA compliant. Also, caution to use caution with free services. So data mining has been prohibited by FERPA, and it also acknowledges that the data that is obtained, that data belongs to the school and not to the vendor. Complaints and FERPA violations. Gonzaga University versus Doe, this was a ruling that determined that no private action can be taken if FERPA violations occur. You may file a complaint with the Family Policy Compliance Office, but you cannot privately sue. So results of FERPA violations may result in loss of federal funding to the school. So it is important to maintain compliance with FERPA guidelines. Not all complaints result in formal investigations. The main thing with some of these investigations is to just get the school back in compliance with FERPA guidelines. So the main concern is just that the complaint is addressed and the policies are improved, and then compliance is once again restored. Most violations are the result of accidental disclosure, which is why they're not wanting to punish the schools. They're really just wanting to ensure student safety. So USD 443 board policy includes the address for filing formal complaints. Much of their policies were on board with the research that we had discussed. So if you follow with those policies, then you will be compliant with FERPA guidelines. Thank you very much for your time. Here are my references.